This is Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. November's general election could bring some new faces to Seattle city government. Today, we're diving into the race for City Council Position 8. That is a citywide post representing all of Seattle as opposed to just one geographic district. The incumbent in this race is Councilmember Alexis Mercedes Rinck. She won the seat after a special election last year. Now Rinck is widely seen as the most progressive voice on the council. In the summer's primary, she got a whopping 78% of the vote. This fall, Rinck is facing off against a Republican business owner in the general election, Rachel Savage. We have talked to Savage already about her campaign, and you can find that conversation in the Soundside podcast feed. Right now, I'm joined in studio live by Position 8 Seattle City Councilmember Alexis Mercedes Rinck. Thank you, Councilmember, for being here. It's really great to have you.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's start with your elevator pitch. I mean, you are asking voters to vote for you, again, kind of in rapid succession. Your last election wasn't that long ago, it feels like, because it was a special election. For you, in the short time you've been on council, how have you proven that you should keep this seat?
Absolutely. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Mercedes Rinck. I'm a renter and someone who takes the bus to work every day. And I went from waiting tables next to the Space Needle to working on policy at the UW Tower to now serving you on Seattle City Council, fighting for a city that works for all of us and not just the ultra-wealthy few. Now, in my 10 months on council, I've been leading on legislation to address affordability while also responding to the harmful impacts of the Trump regime, which I'm excited to talk more about today. But I was brought to this work because of my upbringing. I am proudly raised by my grandparents. I was born to teenagers who were caught in the cycles of substance use disorder, homelessness, and gang violence. But I am here today because of good teachers in public schools that saw me and intervened when I needed it. I'm here because of the Boys and Girls Club, my local library. So I stand here today a living testament to when we invest in working families and young people, regardless of their beginnings, we can change generations. And that's why I'm fighting for those investments every day on council.
Let me ask you about public safety, because I think that is something that your opponent, Rachel Savage, is really running most of her criticism and her campaign on. The city council this week voted 7-2 to expand police surveillance camera usage throughout the city. You were one of the no votes, along with Dan Strauss, your colleague. You voted against that expansion. This is expanding something called the Real-Time Crime Center. And there are already cameras on Aurora, North Aurora Avenue, down in the 3rd Avenue downtown corridor, and at 12th and Jackson in Seattle. This is part of a pilot program. Now, the city council has approved expanding them to areas around Garfield High School, in parts of Capitol Hill. Why did you oppose that plan, and what do you think this means for Seattle?
Certainly. It's been an interesting week in City Hall. You know, I think we're all in agreement that we want to be creating a safe community for everybody. And we're also needing to face the music that we're also in a budget-constrained environment. And we need to make sure that every dollar that we're putting out there is funding things that we know work. And that was one of the points that I raised on the dais this week, just the point about this pilot program, which just started last year. And I want to be clear, it was voted on last year, but just started a couple of months ago. So this is a pilot program. We have commissioned for a study to be done through University of Pennsylvania, but we haven't seen results yet. And that paired with the fact that we haven't seen results yet, it's a new program, we're in a budget-constrained environment, but also the myriad of voices coming out in strong opposition to an expansion of this technology at this time. And those voices include the ACLU, a number of our immigrant rights organizations, one of our own police accountability bodies known as the Community Policing Commission, and a letter from 17 state legislators who are highlighting also the issues we're having currently at the state level when it comes to protections around data. And all of these folks who had turned out alongside the 105 people who came out for public comment and the over 1,000 emails we received on this topic as well, were all highlighting very real concerns around data security for this kind of information and how we're already seeing it being this kind of technology being tapped into in other partner jurisdictions around the country. I highlighted a number of these during the council meeting, even as recently as this week, seeing in San Francisco, automated license plate reader data information tapped into and used in deportations tapped into by ICE. So there were a myriad of concerns raised These are real concerns based on what we're seeing across the country. And for those reasons, I voted no on the expansion.
You did introduce an amendment, and we'll move on from the cameras issue in order to get to as much as possible today. But you did introduce an amendment that says if the Trump administration tries to subpoena that information or access it some way, that the cameras would be turned off, right?
Specifically, if the Trump administration subpoenas or issues a warrant for anything related to a federal civil immigration matter. So not just any kind of subpoena or warrant, but specifically for federal civil immigration matters.
Got it.
We would still need to turn over that information, but the cameras would be put on a 60-day pause, and that would allow for city officials to evaluate the program and the continuation of its use.
Your opponent, Rachel Savage, has called for tripling the size of Seattle's police force. She also says that the city needs to allow law enforcement to actually arrest criminals, something she claims is not happening right now. Is Seattle too lax on crime right now, Councilmember? I mean, how should the city approach keeping people safe?
Certainly. We want to be building a public safety system that has a quick response and a right response for given public safety scenarios, and scaling, but also right-sizing our first responder workforce to be able to address that. And from that, I mean law enforcement, emergency, medical, also our behavioral health responders will be really important for that matter. But also, we need to make sure that we're taking steps to prevent things from happening in the first place. So investing in programs that support young people and try and minimize and address gun violence, which continues to be pervasive in our community. I was proud to partner with some of our state legislators in pushing for important legislation in this year's legislative session, permit to purchase, again, in an effort to get guns out of the hands of individuals who may cause harm. But we also want to be mindful that, again, a call to triple our police force, again, while we're in a budget-constrained environment, feels unrealistic. And I hear the undertone of that, wanting to make sure that we're taking these very public safety challenges that are facing our community and building that system that, again, has quick responses and right responses, and being clear-eyed that our communities are safest when we are all healthy and housed. Those are really important measures as well, which is why my campaign has also had such a strong focus on addressing affordability in our city.
Let me ask you about another thing that your opponent told me when I talked to her this week. She has called for President Trump to send the National Guard into Seattle. She says she wants the Guard to help build centers for drug treatment and homeless shelters. Meanwhile, Rachel Savage, claims that you would fight these crime prevention, what she calls crime prevention measures, every step of the way, drawing a contrast with your work on the council. What's your response to that?
My opponent's full embrace of MAGA policies is out of touch, out of date, and downright dangerous. A number of the policies that she supports, we've phased out and moved towards more models like Housing First because the previous policies didn't work.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about Housing First in just a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
But I think to this point that we want to make sure that we're investing in things that we know works. And we see time and time again, study after study, even with our own local health through housing program, resounding success with, I believe, 90% of folks who are in that program remaining housed. That's an important indicator. So in many ways, I don't want to negate what she might be saying about some of the public safety challenges, because I think in many ways, my opponent's candidacy is symptomatic of our current system that isn't working when it comes to fully addressing real social challenges. However, I want to make sure that we are leading with funding programs that we know work and not abandoning or dehumanizing people along the way in doing that.
Yeah, I think what she's saying is that she's been this business owner on Capitol Hill, seen the neighborhood change so much over the years, and street disorder and visible homelessness and the mental health crisis are kind of getting business owners in certain areas of the city just to a breaking point. And it's almost like she says she walked away from the Democratic Party because of it. She felt like the Democrats weren't offering any solutions. But what I'm hearing from you is you feel like you understand that anger. You just disagree with the direction she's moving in. Can you speak more to that? Like, her argument is that Democrats have been in charge for a while and that they haven't offered solutions.
And we should hold leaders accountable when it comes to addressing these very real challenges. I think we are all dismayed when we see what is happening on our streets. Seeing our neighbors suffering and unhoused is heartbreaking, and it's something that we shouldn't accept. We can and must do better. And in the cases of so many of the programs that we do see operating well and showing positive outcomes are not scaled to meet the need of the thousands of people that we have on the streets. Now, we need to make sure that we are investing more in a number of these programs that are doing incredible work. We need to make sure that we see also investments on the state level in this matter, because unfortunately throughout we saw with deinstitutionalization in the 80s, there was major divestment in behavioral health, and we were just trying to make up on lost ground on that front. But this is also why my campaign has such a strong focus on affordability, because I also want to acknowledge the moment that we're in when it comes to the services that we have. Many of the services we have in City of Seattle rely on federal funding, and we're looking at a reality where we are potentially losing permanent supportive housing that's currently housing folks that have high behavioral health needs and physical needs. We're looking at losing housing resources and food access resources, and really losing ground on any of the progress we have made. And so this is also why in this particular moment, we have such a strong focus on affordability, because when you are living paycheck to paycheck, you are one life instance away from becoming unhoused yourself. So the best thing we can do in this moment is work on addressing affordability so we can keep folks from becoming unhoused in the first place, but also ensuring that we are doubling down on investments that we know work. And that's why I was proud to put forward the Seattle Shield initiative to try and backfill and make sure we're creating protected funding for a number of these programs. And
we're going to talk more about that in just a second after a quick break. The Seattle Shield initiative is the changes to the B&O tax that you and the mayor have collaborated on. That'll be after just a very quick break here on KUOW. You're listening to Alexis Mercedes Rinck, Seattle City Council member in the position 8 spot. She is running for re-election here on the November ballot. We've talked to her opponent, Rachel Savage, also this week, and you can find that interview on the Soundside podcast. Back with more Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. I'm talking with Seattle City Council member Alexis Mercedes Rinck. She's in the position 8 citywide, one of the citywide seats. She's in position 8, and she's running for re-election here on the November ballot. And we talked a little bit about this issue of housing first policies. The city and most homeless providers, service providers, and housing providers have moved to this idea of providing low barrier housing for people with complex needs. Rachel Savage, your opponent, wants to change that. She aligns with the executive order from the Trump administration, where they've said we need to see a shift towards requirements for mental health or drug treatment, and that people can't, just be housed without pursuing sobriety, pursuing treatment. Rachel Savage told me that she would rather folks either enter long-term treatment or jail than be housed and still using drugs or still in a mental health crisis. You previously worked as a policy analyst for the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, Councilmember. Based on that experience, how do you respond to your opponent's proposal that we should end housing first in Seattle?
Certainly. And this is what I mean when I say my opponent's policies are outdated. Housing First came about as a result of the failures of the approach that my opponent is pushing for. We're just coming around in a circle. And I think it's important to note that the data, again, is clear on the outcomes of Housing First. And actually, the National Library of Medicine analyzed across 26 separate scientific studies and found that Housing First programs on average decreased homelessness by 88%. And so I center that because there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I think it's really important to clarify since my opponent is perpetuating it. But I want to remind the public that we've been there before, and it didn't get us the results that we wanted, and that's why we moved towards this model. Of course, there are new elements that have come into play. We know the fentanyl crisis has been a new variable for all of us. It is the most addictive substance in the world that we've ever seen before, and so we're grappling and changing approaches, but I think it's really important to center what the data shows us.
She says that these low barrier entry shelters and housing providers create a magnet for disorder, for crime, and that the areas around them become unsafe. What do you say to people who have concerns about that?
Yeah, and this is the point where, we We do need to do better. I want to acknowledge concerns that our neighbors, I certainly hear about. And while I'm pointing to these data points about the successes of Housing First when studied, I also want to acknowledge that, yes, we do need to do better. And we're going to need an all-hands-on-deck approach, working both with our service providers and with community as we navigate this time. And my concern in this moment, again, to go back to this point about, is just the losses in federal funding and how it will impact the existing programs that we have, and the potential that the programs that we have could shut down, and we could be looking at thousands more people being exited directly to the streets. That's the reality we're facing in this particular moment, by having losses in federal funding for these programs. And so, again, that's why we've been clear-eyed in my office about being able to find ways to invest more, both working at the state level, but also here on the local level with the Seattle Shield Initiative.
And let's talk about that one, the SHIELD initiative, the B&O tax changes. So the city is facing this big budget shortfall, $244 million or so over the next 2 years. You have presented this plan to tackle that budget gap that'll be on the November ballot for Seattle voters, along with the mayor. That is the changes to the business and occupation tax, occupancy tax. You are proposing that this would raise a projected $90 million in revenue for the city by kind of shifting the tax to be higher for the top 10% of businesses and exempting most smaller businesses from the tax. Now, I want you to talk about the tax and, first off, why you want to do it. And second off, how do you make sure that this doesn't potentially, push businesses to relocate, those kinds of concerns that often come up when we talk about raising business taxes in the city?
Mm-hmm. Certainly. Well, I think this story starts actually with the start of the Select Committee on Federal Administration and Policy Changes. I think that was actually the last time I talked to
wow. That's been a hot minute. Yeah.
I know. Feels like ages. Feels like ages.
Yeah.
What a couple months it's been. But we, early in my term, and just seeing the flurry of executive orders coming out of the Trump regime, from pauses on federal funding going to cities and so on, our office made a public call to stand up a dedicated committee, which we call now the Select Committee on Federal Administration and Policy Changes, to be analyzing these impacts. And so I'm happy to share that committee was stood up and continues to meet. I'm the chair of that committee, and we've had dedicated sessions. We meet on a monthly basis and have dedicated panels focused on a myriad of topics. So we've had sessions focused on reproductive health care access, talking about immigration and labor protections, the status of housing and homelessness programs, but also what's going to happen to housing production now with tariffs. We've had sessions with small businesses and talking about tourism and the impacts on our economy, and most recently having a session focused on emergency response and planning, and the fact that we still haven't gotten our check from FEMA from the windstorm that happened earlier this year. And so it was through all of these discussions that we're having in this committee, things that are being daylighted by service providers and our local experts about these impacts, where that coupled with the city's own budget challenges, it became very clear for my team we have to do something for the sake of delivering on the services that Seattle residents know, love, and frankly depend on. We needed to do something, and we started crafting the B&O proposal alongside a number of small business leaders upon engaging and looking at our options. We worked alongside small business leaders, alongside our partners in labor, and then, of course, our human services providers who are on the front lines of seeing the impacts of this administration, to craft this proposal, which would, in essence, as you put it, shift tax burden to larger businesses. When we looked across the region, many cities have a B&O tax, but they will set different exemption levels for different businesses. So what do we mean by that? B&O tax is paid based on gross receipts, so just how much business you're doing. It's not based on revenue, but just how much business you're doing. Our current B&O exemption level essentially says that a business that once you make above $100,000. You do $100,000 in business, then the B&O tax kicks in. But when we looked around the region, we saw a number of other cities have much higher exemption thresholds. For city of Renton, it kicks in at like a $250,000, for example, and so on. And so seeing that kind of disparate amount and thinking about what does that mean for small businesses, we start taxing more small businesses at regionally higher rates as well. And so looking at the mechanisms that we have on the city level, we looked at, and what's in the proposal is essentially moving that exemption level up to $2 million, and then also building in a standard deduction at $2 million. So now we have what we've put before voters is a break-even point where it's of about $5.7 million in gross receipts. And so what that in effect does is we're offering tax relief to 90% of businesses in Seattle. Over 70% of businesses in Seattle will now no longer owe B&O tax to the city. There's still B&O tax at the state level, but when it comes to the city tax, more than 70% of businesses will not be paying any to the city, and 90% of businesses will be paying less. And in the meantime, we're asking our top 10% largest businesses here to chip in a bit more. And so the version that left council actually has a raise of $85 million. So the initial proposal would bring in $90 million. There were a couple of amendments that would create exemptions for certain institutions that got through. So now the proposal before voters is estimated to bring in $85,000, and the final $85 million. Thank you.
It didn't get downgraded that far. Yeah.
Yes, $85 million. And I'll close with the important part, which is what is this going towards? And this is really focused on the learnings that we had in that federal committee, investing in the areas that have been hit the hardest. So hunkering down on our local investments in food access, gender-based violence services, housing, to make sure that people are whole and well during this time. And so I was proud to put this forward alongside the mayor, and I'm hopeful that Seattle voters agree that this is a measure that we need at this time and will create a lot of relief for small businesses while investing where it matters most right now.
Are you worried about businesses leaving? Or the criticism I've heard is that because it's based on gross receipts, that businesses with small margins could be hit by the higher tax, even though, they have high, gross receipts, like grocery stores or grocery businesses sometimes have, a lot of things coming in and out, but the overall margins are pretty slim. And so they would be maybe potentially hurt by the higher B&O tax at that top 10%. Do you have any reflection on those criticisms?
Yeah, we've had some conversation. Of course, this comes on the heels of the state legislature also taking action on B&O, and we're headed into a legislative session in a couple months as well. And we'll be talking with our state delegation about how we can address low-margin businesses. And so that'll be a continued conversation. We're going to see how this proposal really, really hashes out. But I'm hopeful that even for our large businesses, they see that they need a healthy, safe city in order to also do business. And these are the investments that will make a difference and also make it a place where their workforce can thrive and live good lives too. And so I'm hopeful they see this as a value and frankly necessary investment back into the city where they have been able to build success and really, yes.
One more minute, just in our final time with you here. What do you want to leave voters with? Your closing argument here as you are going to be on the ballot in November, trying to be reelected as Seattle City Council member.
Certainly. Thank you. Well, thank you again for having me in my short time on council, just 10 months. It feels like I was just here yesterday. But in my short time on council, I've been really proud of the work that we've been able to do, from introducing the Seattle Shield initiative, but also securing funding in our supplemental budget, funding that would go directly to immigrant families facing deportation and Know Your Rights training. So investments that are helping combat the impacts of the Trump regime's cruel deportation agenda. We've introduced some of the boldest amendments to our comprehensive plan, which would create more housing opportunity in more neighborhoods, while also introducing separate legislation legislation for equitable development and making it possible for more community-based organizations to build more housing. We've been chairing a committee that's been leading the way of daylighting the issues facing us from the Trump regime, while also defending against the attacks on our ethics code, making sure that Sound Transit 3 stays on timeline. And I was proud to be a co-sponsor on banning algorithmic rent fixing here as well. And I'll close by saying we saved Hot Rat Summer. So we've been really busy here on council, and I would love and appreciate the opportunity to have 4 years to see through this vision, keep up this work, and make sure that Seattle is a city that really works for everyone.
Hot Rat Summer is some public art that you might, if you don't live in Seattle, might not be aware of, but it was covered up. It's now uncovered. Anyway, it's a Capitol Hill thing. Alexis Mercedes Rinck, Seattle City Council member running for re-election. Really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. This show is only possible because listeners support us. If you're able to give right now, please check out the show notes for a link to donate. And don't forget, you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 FM Seattle at noon and 8 p.m., Monday through Thursday, or anytime online at KUOW.org.